Well, hello, and welcome to the Creative Critique Live. I hope all of you are healthy and safe, and hope our time here together gives you a little break from what feels like a perilous time out there for us today. I'm grateful that I'm in a fortunate situation where I work from home or my studio, and so I can continue to work with potential students online. And I never take that for granted. But I also want to help as much as I can with making this easier for all of us. And so I thought that this was a good way to kind of, again, give us a little break from the craziness out there and focus a little more on things that I think we really care about. So this is the first in a series of webinars, live webinars that I plan to offer over the next couple of months or two to help all of you grow, all of us grow as visual artists. And I use those words very carefully, visual artist. I know that we use the medium of photography, but what I think matters most is what we actually say with our pictures and how are we connecting with the viewer emotionally. Now, the gear and the technology is important, but that's more related to the how question, right? Like, how do we use the gear? How do we use the technology? But I think you'll get much more satisfaction, especially more long-term growth, when you ask the why question. Why are you making the choices that you're making? Why are you making the pictures that you're making? Why am I photographing this? Why do I want to share my feelings? These questions ask you to look inward. And that's where I think you find your own style, your own way of seeing. Because if you look inward, there's only one of you. And that's what we really have to tap into. The way that we see the world, the way that we want to share how we connect with what resonates with us. Now, I wasn't sure how this was going to go in terms of how many images I would get. I knew I would get a fair amount of images, but I've gotten a lot of submissions, over 75 pictures. And so I've had to think carefully about how I was going to select images and offer feedback and so forth. And I decided that I want to make this as fair and honest a critique as possible. I use the word critique very carefully because instead of criticism or judgment or things like that, critique is a way of questioning everything that you do, questioning what's working, what's not working, how can you make it better to achieve a certain goal or a certain perspective. And that includes the way I work and the way I evaluate your images. I'm always looking for ways to make what I offer more helpful and more beneficial. So I want to be fair with everyone. That means I'm going to try to actually get to everyone's images. That means that we'll have less time per image, but that's okay. I'd rather offer you what really matters instead of, spending a lot of time on small little details, just so that we can get through everyone's pictures and I can offer something to everyone. I want to be fair, but I also want to be honest. I think honesty is a key, one of my core values, and honest critique, honest feedback means that you know exactly where I'm coming from. Now, these are obviously based on, number one, my opinion, my way of seeing things. And so it's not the only way of seeing things, by far from that. And I'm also learning as I grow myself. But it's also based on a lot of work, a lot of experience that I've put into learning principles and fundamentals of composition and photography. It's based on a lot of trial and error, a lot of failure on my part, and trying to break that down and see what wasn't working, how to improve that. And that's something that I've spent a lot of time doing over the past decade, over the past 15 years, as well as helping students with that as well. Those of you who know me a little bit better know also that I've been learning to paint over the last 5 years. And that's been an eye-opening experience, not because I'm doing it in place of photography. I'm doing it as a way to consolidate everything that goes on in my mind when I'm out in a beautiful landscape. I want to be able to use composition and learn as much as I can. And I saw that as a way to really push myself to the very limit of what I thought I was capable or not capable of doing. And I'm bringing those lessons and the things that I'm learning there back to my photography, back to my teaching, because I think that it all works as a whole. So again, this is going to be my opinions, but my opinion about your images, but hopefully you'll understand that I'm coming from a place of honesty and a place of wanting to help you more than anything else. If you look at the right-hand side of the video, there's a chat window there where you can talk to each other. There's also another little tab at the top that has like an icon of a person. That's where you can ask questions. So the chatting is if you want to chat and say hello, whatever. But if you want to ask a question that I will see, put it into that second tab there on the right-hand side. Click on that tab and leave a question there. I will periodically look over at that tab and see what the questions are, and I'll try to answer them if they relate to what I'm talking about without getting too off track. But again, I'll try to do my best to answer your questions. So before I get into the images, and like I said, just to reiterate again, in today's session, we'll probably get through a dozen images, something like that. I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. Whatever we don't get through today, we'll carry over to the next session. These will be recorded so you can watch them again. And hopefully in a couple of sessions, we'll get through the majority of the images. So having said that, let's jump in. Before I get into actually looking at pictures, I just want to go over my framework, if you will, my framework for developing an image, for making an image in the field, for what I think composition is all about. And this framework is important for you to understand because, number one, I think it'll help you when you think about composition. And I also think that it will help you to see how I'm going about providing feedback for you. Every image that I look at, whether it's my own or someone else's, I'm using this framework. Again, this is a very broad framework. There's a lot of things that go underneath it, but as a general framework to decide and to understand what is working in the image and what is not. And this compositional framework is not one I invented. I've basically put this together from lots of other great artists that have come before me, but it's based on three things. I use the acronym LCU. And these three things are three things that I look for in every image to see if I'm making the strongest possible composition. Number one is, am I leading the viewer, or are you leading the viewer, right? Does the composition help the viewer? Does it lead them through the image in an interesting way that shows them what the center of interest is in the picture? The center of interest can be a subject, something specific, something of content, but the center of interest can also be a mood or a feeling or just the overall ambiance of an image. We like to call that mood, but that could be the center of interest as well. So are we leading the viewer? Is there a clear center of interest? And three, does the composition look and feel unified? And that's where the U comes in, right? Is every area and element of the composition contributing to the whole? And does everything support the center of interest or message? So, we can think about musical terms like harmony and arrangement, right? And composition, of course, that also is used in music. And so this is what I'm thinking about when I think of unification. Dissonance in music is when there's a wrong note, right? Everyone knows what that sounds like. And dissonance in an image is when there's something that doesn't fit, that breaks either the center of interest or breaks the path that the viewer is going to follow through the image. So this framework is one that I carry in my head all the time. I'm using it all the time when I'm making images, when I'm evaluating images, and especially when I am editing images in Lightroom. Because when you edit an image in Lightroom, or any application, but we're going to be working in Lightroom today, you should be thinking about how you can edit the image to further strengthen this compositional framework. And this means that you started with this in the field and then you're going to strengthen it in Lightroom. That gives you a why. Okay, the how is more or less how to use Lightroom, what the controls do, what all the adjustments do, the intricacies of the software. Of course, that's important to know and it's critical to know. The why is much different. It's much more interesting because the why is, why am I using this adjustment? Why am I making this darker or lighter? Why am I adding color? Why am I taking away color? The why should be addressing this framework. I'm increasing the contrast in this area because it creates a stronger center of interest, or it creates a stronger leading line. Or I am darkening this area back here because it helps to unify the composition because now it doesn't fight or take away from what is most important, okay? So let's jump in here, and I'm going to start with about 15 images. I asked all of you to put your name into the file name. So if I see the name in the file name, I will mention your name. If I don't see it there, well, hopefully you're watching this video and you recognize your picture. But in the future, put your file name there so I can at least mention your name. These images were sort of selected randomly. I picked some over others just to get a mix, so I didn't have all portraits or all landscapes. But generally speaking, they're kind of at random. And as I said, I'm going to go through them, and on ones that I spend a little more time on, it's because I feel there's more to address. And on the ones where I spend less time on, it's because there's less to address. And if something is working, then there's nothing more to be said, except that I'll highlight what is working. Just real quick, someone has asked if this will be recorded. Yes, it'll be recorded. Is there a way to see this full screen? Yes, if you hover down to the, let's see, to the bottom right of the, I'm not sure if you can see it. You should be able to see it full screen. On the video, you should be able to hover down to the bottom right. There should be a full screen icon there, but if there isn't, I will look into that in the future. This is a new system that I'm using, so I'm trying to make sure that everything works as smoothly as possible, but hopefully if anything that's not working this time, we'll get it working better the next time. Okay, so this first image is from George Araldi, and just to let you know, by the way, I'm working on a Mac. I'm in Mac OS Catalina 10.15, and I'm in Lightroom 9, or whatever the last version of Lightroom Classic is. So this image, first thing that I find beautiful about this image is the cloud formations are really nice. Just love the way they have this beautiful soft feel to them. They all kind of create these repeating lines, repeating patterns, these shapes that kind of lead down to the mountains. The mountains also feel very soft and diffuse in the background. And then we're hit with this strong yellow foreground. And of course, what obviously is the center of interest, this shack here, or this shed, which is getting light from what appears to be the right-hand side here. I like the sense of perspective. I like that there's a definite foreground, middle ground, background. I feel as though I'm led to what the center of interest is, more or less. So that's the L, right, leading the viewer. Center of interest, that's obviously established. So as an example, something that would not be a clear center of interest is if we had other structures around this area, then it would be difficult to know what the center of interest was. But here I think it's pretty clear. And does the image feel unified? Does everything feel like it belongs? And that's the area where I feel that there's a weakness. And for me, the weakness is that these foreground grasses sort of get in the way. They're not really leading us into the picture. They establish a foreground, yes, but the foreground I think is already established by this very strong shape and color, which is on a third. So from here down, we've already got this strong foreground, mountains, middle ground, and then the clouds in the back are the background. The grasses, or these plants that are growing here in the foreground, I think are more of a distraction. They don't really add to the picture from my perspective. Now, if we were to do a basic crop like this, keeping the aspect ratio, I think that we start to compromise the kind of the foreground a bit. Now, to me, the foreground and the shack, or the shed there, feels a little bit squeezed, a little bit too tight to the bottom of the frame. If I back out a little bit, that feels a bit better. You can see how eliminating those grasses just lets your eye flow into the picture more. We've got so much of these yellows that just kind of want you to scan around. I think, again, this is really more of a distraction. It doesn't add anything to the picture. This is obviously a case where you could go into something like Photoshop and clone all those grasses out. I'm not sure you'd want to do that, but let me show you an alternate crop. And again, I'm keeping the aspect ratio, but if we did something like this, And I'm going to unlock the aspect ratio so that I can work outside of the original format. So something like this to me starts to feel a lot better. Now, why is that? Well, you see now how the grasses are creating a shape. Okay, so we've actually have sort of a framing effect. And now your eye moves more easily into the picture. And I think that is what I'm looking for. That's what when I talk about leading the viewer in, there's much less of me wanting to my eye to dance across these grasses left and right. And that's really not where you want the viewer to go. You want them to go into the picture. You want to create depth. And this, for me, creates a lot more depth because from a compositional standpoint, again, we're moving into the picture. Now, yes, we lose a lot of those mountains and we lose the beautiful cloud formations. The clouds are still working nicely because they're pointing us down into the picture. So in a way, this leads you here. You pick up this, obviously the center of interest. Your eye kind of moves up through these mountains, up to the sky, and then you come around again. So I know this is a compromise, but I'm not trying to show you exactly what the best picture is, but the way of thinking about creating a better composition. The second thing that I would do with this picture is I would add a simple gradient filter, maybe something like this. And actually I want to turn this upside down. So something like that. And the purpose of this would be to create a gradient or to create a little more variation in the foreground. So that's how it is without any variation. If I darken the foreground, now we start to see movement because our eyes always want to move along variation. So we're a little darker in the bottom, going to lighter areas, and that creates more interest along this foreground. It's not so similar, not so uniform from top to bottom. In fact, I could even extend this up like this, okay, creating a really strong gradient from foreground to about here. And then we can use the brush tool in the gradient filter to erase this effect off of the structure. So, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Let's go back to this filter again. So with this filter selected, you select the brush, and now I can turn this into an erase brush, make it a bit smaller. And by doing this, I'm erasing this effect. And of course, the flow has to be at 100, so we get the full effect. There we go. I'm erasing this effect from the graduated filter. And that's what the mask looks like. So notice that the mask is affecting the bottom. It gradates as it gets towards the top, but there's no mask, or I've created basically like a hole for the shed so that no matter how dark I go, it doesn't affect the shed. See that? So those two adjustments there, I think, will give you the biggest impact on this image. Again, creating more variation along the foreground to lead the viewer into the picture, darker to lighter. It really creates a strong center of interest now. Obviously, you could fudge this a little bit if you wanted to move it a little bit more this way to get this structure more closer to a third. But now I think it simplifies the image and it makes it stronger compositionally. And probably, I think it was probably better here because we get this little thing sticking in on the left-hand side. Makes it stronger compositionally. Again, how to make that work in the original horizontal, probably hard with this particular image. If I was in the field, maybe move past the grasses. Good idea. I think it's a good idea to try to place those grasses in to create a strong foreground element. But again, it's got to work for the composition as it is. And I think in this case, it probably creates a little bit of a distraction unless you do a major cropping like this. All right, so thanks very much, George, for submitting this image. This next image is from Tim Eckert, and it is a sort of a very graphic, colorful image that I guess leads us in the foreground here into these beautiful waves. Then there's, looks like fog in the background with a mountain or cliffs extending into the ocean, and then this beautiful sky in the back catching the last rays of light. That's what it looks like. And I love the shapes, love the mood of the picture, like kind of the ephemeral quality. It's got a very nuanced and sort of ephemeral feel to it, and I really like that. Especially in the back, there's a lot of depth created there with the fog and the light. And then in the foreground, we got these very strong kind of graphic elements with the waves crashing and the water. So I like that. I feel like the center of interest is probably those waves in the center. I think that's the key thing to the picture. If you take those waves away, then you've basically just got the ocean with nothing much happening on it without those waves. And I think it would be missing something. You would be saying, what exactly am I looking at? The wave, for me, has to be the center of interest. And then the unity part, again, that's where I think we can improve this a little bit. I honestly think that there's a bit too much going on with this picture. The greens in the foreground are very strong, and they are distracting, or they're calling a lot of attention away from the center of interest. They are close to the viewer, they're green, they don't really connect to anything in the picture. They have a lot of texture, they're very vivid, and I think they actually detract. They are something that competes with the main center of interest. So I would suggest cropping it out completely, and I would do something like this. And perhaps moving over a little bit. Something like that, okay? Now look how we've got these three elements that work, to my eye, a lot better. You've got the movement of the water bringing you right into the picture. Left-hand corner here brings you in. Then you've got another shape here, brings you into this middle shape. And then you move back into this shape here, and then finally back into the orange sky in the back. The colors are more subdued, except for the top, which allows them to really pull you in. So that creates a nice highlight to the picture. We don't have those strong greens in the foreground kind of pulling us away from that. And I think also the image feels much more graphic this way. It's simpler. So again, we're leading the viewer in a much simpler way. There's a clearer center of interest, and the image is much more unified, I think. Everything seems to work together. Everything seems to belong. Okay? I think the original image is trying too hard. It's putting in too much when we don't need that much to still make the image strong and beautiful. And I think the elements of the image, I think what Tim is trying to convey here really is contained here. I don't think those grasses in the foreground really add anything to the picture. One thing I would add in terms of the editing, I would probably brighten the image up a little bit, especially in the foreground, and create some stronger highlights. So by that I mean I would use some dodging and burning. I'm going to select a lighten tool here. And we want this to be much more pronounced. If that's going to be our center of interest, you really want to make that strong. Same thing here. I would probably add a little more here, like so. And maybe very slight back here. I'm going to drop the flow. Just to open this up back here so it's a little bit more ephemeral and not so dark. Because again, the image really is building. It's building from the foreground with the water to these cliffs with the fog, and then eventually up to that beautiful sky with the clouds catching the low light coming from the sun. All right, so that's something that I would add there. I would also perhaps add another adjustment here, which will be a darken adjustment. So I'm going to create a new brush and make this one darken. And maybe just in here, let me increase the flow again so we get a full effect. For those that may not be familiar, the flow control on the adjustment brush, basically you can think of it as an opacity adjustment. So with the flow of 100, the opacity of that adjustment is 100 or 100%. You're getting 100% of the effect. If you drop the flow to 50, then the brush is only applied at a 50% strength. And this allows you to build up the effect. You can use it to sort of build up an area by brushing over and over again. Whereas with the flow at 100, once you add an adjustment, it's at 100%, and adding on top of that doesn't increase it anymore. Okay. So something like that. Here is the before without any adjustments, and here's after. Okay, just to emphasize those highlights, emphasize the center of interest, which is here, and then of course help bring your eye up. So one thing I forgot to show is I have this cool drawing tool. Let me see if it works here. Yeah, so let me do that again. So for me, right, you want the eye to flow this way, kind of this way, and like that. And that's the flow direction of the eye is going to follow. In fact, you can even take a little detour and come into this little spot over here, which has another dark area. But again, that is a beautiful S-curve. An S-curve is a very beautiful in an image because the eye just finds those much more natural and much more appealing, much more interesting than a straight line. So anytime you can create a curve that flows through a picture, a Z or an S or a C, those are very strong compositionally. Okay, so thanks very much, Tim, for submitting that. Beautiful. Someone asked, as far as the image that you're submitting, does it have? People have asked this before. Does it have to be processed or not? I'm leaving that up to you. I don't really care what you send me, right? If you have an image that you've processed and you're happy with the processing and you want me to evaluate it with that and offer you some critique on that, then I will. If you don't know how to process it, by that I mean you're not sure how to begin or what it needs, then send that as well. So whatever is best for you is what works for me. As far as this workshop, well, do I use Lightroom or Photoshop? So today in 2020, I am probably 99.9% Lightroom. I do not take any images, virtually any images into Photoshop. That is any of my landscape nature images. Obviously things that are not meant for fine art, editorial images or things like that, where advertising, I don't do much of that, but that would be a Photoshop thing. But anything where it's a fine art image for me, I'm doing it in Lightroom. Why? Because I love the simplicity of the workflow. I like staying in one interface. I like keeping the images as raw files. And I also think that Lightroom has much more power than most people realize or know. And once they really dive deep into what Lightroom can do, they'll realize that it can do a lot of things, right? It provides me with 99.9% of what I need to get done. Again, I'm not talking about things where Photoshop is obviously stronger for things like compositing and adding images together and doing very, very intricate selections. Those things, obviously, that's what Photoshop is designed for. But I don't do those kinds of things, right? I'm making images that are much more made in the field. And so I just like the simplification. I want to keep my tools and my workflow as simple as possible, because the simpler I make the tools, the easier it is for me to master them, and the more time I can spend on the LCU, right? On the creativity, on the aesthetics, on composition, because strong composition will always trump any kind of technology or special technique that you can learn in an application. Okay, so moving on. This image is by Bob Carr, and beautiful image. Love just the feel and the mood of the picture. Obviously, when we've got a person in a picture, that changes the whole feel of the image. There's something about a person in a picture that just makes that the center of interest. Very, 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 very difficult to make a picture with a person that's not the center of interest. But the way the image is composed here, I think it works very well, because it's down in the corner. Obviously, everything else in the picture seems to not interfere with the person. In fact, there's a relationship between the person here, where they're looking. They're kind of looking out towards the forest. They're sitting in this cove, kind of protected from the elements, so to speak, or just sort of admiring the beauty. And what I love about this picture is something that is also very important in composition, which is this idea, which I would strongly suggest all of you think deeply about. This idea that in composition, it is much better to suggest than to tell. All right. In other words, don't tell people exactly what you see. Suggest things, because by suggesting things, you can be much more nuanced, much more subtle, and the image has a much longer interest for the viewer because there are other things that are going to keep exploring. So by that I mean, in this picture, we see the forest. We kind of see what's what can we imagine, but we don't see it fully. There's a lot left to the imagination. There's a lot left to suggest. We don't quite see the view here. We assume that he's seeing the view out. But you can imagine if we were standing in this place, we would want to go where he is to see what the view is. So I think that's a really key, important part of making a composition interesting. Don't know that I would change much. I think maybe making it a little bit tighter compositionally. Again, I'm very, very big on simplifying your pictures. I don't know if I'd want to go from the bottom, maybe from up here just a little bit. Wouldn't want to touch the top of these trees there. So I think just something like that, just to strengthen it a bit more. Again, I would probably also make this foreground a bit darker, again, like a gradient. So we could click and drag this here. And in fact, I'll show you a quick tip. I clicked and dragged down, and I can flip this filter around, but an easy way to avoid that problem is to click and drag up. And what I want to do is spread this gradient over the bottom like this. So now it's kind of creating like a vignette, but I only want it on the bottom here. And the other thing that I would probably do is create a stronger feeling of light, perhaps, to give the person in the picture a bit more emphasis. So maybe in here, just brighten this up like this. Maybe this light bouncing around here. And I would probably do the same with some of these trees just to give them a little bit more depth. Okay, we always want to try to create as much depth in our pictures. That means make them as dimensional as possible, because photography needs that. Photography is a two-dimensional medium, and we want to create more depth. So I'm just adding a little bit of brightness on one side of these. Something happened here. My mouse stopped moving. Okay, so where were we? I was adding, yes, okay, so I was brightening this up here. So there's my mask so far. I'll add a little more here, maybe a little more here. And so you can see now, if I make this a much brighter, you see how that adds some little highlights there. Now that obviously is too much, but I'm just going to bring that back down about there. And I'm also going to close this and just push the whites a little bit more. All right, and I'll check my blacks here, pull the blacks down a little bit. Again, that creates more depth. I think right there is pretty good. So let's look at our before and after. So before, it's a little flatter, and after, okay? And one thing I would also probably add is, again, back to this brush here, I'll add a new adjustment brush. I'm just brightening this up in here so that your eye really wants to kind of go out in this direction. And that kind of creates the interest. So our eye follows along here. Back to this tool again. So I'm thinking our eye follows this way, around here, and then again we find these trees, and that brings us around again. And of course, these other areas just help to provide some context, to provide depth, to give us a sense of the landscape itself. But I think that's the sort of the path that I think is strongest for the image. All right, so nice job there, Bob. Thanks very much for sharing. This next image is by, don't know, but it's a old man in a window. I think this image works pretty well. So obviously leading the viewer to the center of interest. We're back again with a portrait, and whenever there's a person in the picture, as long as we don't have other people that are competing with that, that's going to be the center of interest. I think the colors, I love the color harmony here. The colors will work really well. The fact that the background to the person is dark really makes it stand out. It provides a nice backdrop. It provides a nice graphic profile to his face, nice shape and nice negative space up here. And again, the unity of the image is really nice. I think, again, one thing that can be improved is the placement of the center of interest. Right now it's dead center. And there seems to be sort of a kind of a symmetry between this area here, which is very large, and this over here. And I think if we kind of de-emphasize the left side of the picture there, something like that, I think that makes the picture a lot stronger. We move the center of interest off center, more to the left. The gaze, the direction that he's looking in, becomes the larger part of the image. In other words, there's a greater distance between here and here than here and here. And so that really helps us to kind of move this way through the picture and doesn't let us get lost on this side. So yeah, it works really nice. Again, I think you could I think we could maybe gradate the picture a little bit better. So once again, this is a common thread here, right? Just gradate the bottom a little bit like that, so that your eye is moving in. Another way of doing that would have been, and I'll get rid of this filter here. Another way of doing that would have been to use just a small amount of vignetting like that. That has the same effect. So it's a question of whether you want to darken all four corners or you want to have a little more control and just darken, one or two corners. But that's the idea. Anytime we have variation, that's what you want, generally speaking. All right. So thank you, whoever sent this image. Beautiful. Someone is asking me about circles with the adjustment brush. I'm not sure. That could have been just something that was going on. I'm not sure what happened there, but if it happens again, let me know. You should only see one. Well, we'll see what happens in the next one. So this image is submitted by Justine Carson. Thank you very much, Justine. Beautiful picture. I love the strong graphic shapes in the picture. We've got some nice diagonals, repeating shapes that sort of move the viewer from front to back. So there's a sense of depth here. We've got nice foreground, we've got middle ground, and then we've got background. So there's a nice sense of moving front to back. There's a nice progression, which gives the image a lot of depth. I like that. I also like the way the textures change from the bottom to the top. So in this case, we do have a foreground that works because there is a connection between the foreground and the background. These grasses here, these trees, these greens sort of connect to the greens in the middle ground, to the greens in the back. So we've got this continuity of this particular thing, these greens and these shapes, this texture. And then the rocks also have interesting lines. So there's a diagonal here, another one here, other diagonal. So very graphic, and I like that very much. I think what can be improved here is I would probably suggest a tiny bit of a crop here to just strengthen this a little bit. So I'm getting rid of some of the stuff here on the left that we really don't need. Something like that. And then I think a bit of processing to sort of connect the foreground and the background. So we'll bring down some of the highlights. We'll probably drop the exposure a little bit. Add some blacks. I'm holding down the Option key on my Mac, Alt on the PC to bring up this white overlay, and this shows me where the blacks are starting to clip. Open up the shadows. I'll add some clarity. And then I'll also warm up the image. I think it can be a little bit warmer to get that beautiful light. I'm also going to add some vibrance here. And then I'm going to drop a graduated filter like this. Pull down some highlights a little bit of exposure. Again, I'm looking to connect the foreground and the background a bit more so that the background doesn't look so washed out and the foreground doesn't get too dark on us. Add some clarity to that. So I'm adding just clarity to this filter here. Notice that, again, I'm using a very broad filter to get a sense of what I want, but when I'm ready to commit to this filter, I will then go in, or I can go in with a brush and erase it from areas where I think it doesn't quite work. So that would be, for example, on the left-hand side here. Okay, and also maybe in this area here. So I'm erasing from this graduated filter. So again, there's the filter mask, and you can see how I've taken away the right side where it's hitting that rock. Now I'm making very broad adjustments. I'm not being very, very, very careful because I'm doing that, number one, in the light of time. But the second thing is that I would caution you generally in making very surgical adjustments. I don't know what people say out there. I don't know what Lightroom gurus say or editing gurus say. I don't like surgical adjustments because they make your images look edited. And to me, the death of an image is when people notice the edits and they don't see the image itself. You want your editing, you want your developing, you want your interpreting to be invisible. You want them to see exactly what you want them to feel. You want to convey what you want to convey without them seeing the edits. Once they see what you've adjusted or have an inkling that something has been edited, then the communication is lost. There's a break in the communication. So when you make very surgical adjustments, it looks edited, and you can be much more loose with your adjustments than you think, and you can get away with that. So for example, you might think that, oh, look, I didn't quite get the top of these mountains up here on the right hand side. Well, that's okay, because maybe this rock here is just a bit darker than this one, right? Like, we don't know if that's the case. Whereas I've had used something like the auto mask, or had tried to go along this ridge with this adjustment very, very precisely. Number one, it takes the fun away when you're working on things so precisely. Number two, and this is nature, and we don't need to be so precise. It may wind up looking more artificial than you want it to be. All right. Second thing I would do is one more adjustment here. I'm going to use a darken brush. New brush, darken, and I'm sorry. Here we go. Brush, new, and I'm just going to darken some of these highlights here, like that. So I've got one circle, okay? That's what we should always have. And another area that I might darken here is some of these striations back here. And I'm gonna, actually that's too strong. So let me undo. I'm gonna lower the flow. There we go. And then one last adjustment, a new brush, brighten. And I'm just going to give this some life. Let me increase the flow back up to 100. I'll give this some life up here, down here, some light. Okay, and that's what that adjustment looks like. Please remember, I am not here to make a masterpiece. I'm here to give you ideas, to give you food for thought, to give you ideas that you can use for your images, how I go about approaching, how I go about editing an image, how I approach the editing process, and then I refine it as I go along. Everything is an iterative process. So I start with very broad adjustments, and then I refine them until I get to what I want. It shouldn't take forever. It shouldn't even take, hours and hours and hours per image. What I've done here already gives you a very clear direction of where I'm going with the image. And if you don't like it, then you can back up and go in a different direction. But if I feel like I'm going in the right direction, then I can continue and refine my adjustments It shouldn't take 6 hours, assuming you know the tools in Lightroom, right? That's the key thing. You have to know what the tools are. But the why question, why am I making these adjustments? Well, again, now we've got this connection of greens to the greens. The graphical elements that I mentioned originally are much stronger now. You can see these diagonals. We're pushing the viewer back into the picture from warmer colors in the foreground to paler colors in the background without the background getting too pale. And I think that makes, that's what this image, what helps this image to I think resonate much more. All right, so thanks again, Justine, for sending this image. Great job. Okay, this image is by Brian Larkin. Thanks, Brian, for submitting this. Interesting image, like the sort of the compositional elements here. First thing that I would do is my eye sees, I see the person's eyes here. They kind of go to here to the foreground, back up to the elbow, and around here. That's kind of where I'm going. Why? Because that creates a nice kind of curving shape there. It also moves me from front to back, back to front. Obviously, the tin picture there is closer to the viewer and it's at the corner and it's got strong light on it. So that's what's going to pull us in. How can we strengthen that, right? How can we make the image stronger? We don't need any of this back here. We certainly don't need any of this back here. So I would do a crop, something like this, okay, that maintains the essence of the image, but doesn't include what's not essential. Right? We need his face. We need this down here. We need kind of the sword that kind of leads us into this line here. So now you've got those lines that I showed you before. They're much stronger now, right? Something like that. And why do I start at the eyes? Because that's really where you're going to spend most of your time in this picture. You're going to spend most of your time on his eyes because that is just human nature. So, and you could go the other way too. Maybe someone could go this way, down this way, something like that. But either way, you're creating this beautiful movement through the picture. And I think that works pretty well. The only other adjustment that I would suggest is possibly darkening this area over here so that it doesn't distract from that movement, that path that I just showed you. Something like that. Maybe darken this in here just to create more variation. Maybe darken this in there. And maybe a little bit more warmth. Oh, that's exposure, sorry. Actually, a little more exposure would work too. And a little bit more warmth. Right, something like that. So again, there's the before and after with the adjustments. So that's before, that's after. Warmer, a little, the green in his jacket is a bit stronger, more vivid. His face is a bit warmer. It makes him a bit more more inviting. And then the crop is the big thing, right? So here's the original, where I think there's just much more things around the periphery that we don't need. This down here, the bottom of this bench here, unnecessary, all this unnecessary. And that really strengthens really what I think is the core of the picture. All right, so thanks, Brian, for submitting that. Next image is by Stephan Harnish. I hope I pronounced that properly. Nice image with the front to back sense of depth and perspective. I like the tree in the foreground there that kind of establishes a pattern with more trees in the back. This yellow kind of connects us through, and there's a really strong graphic nature here with the colors, right? Beautiful yellows and reds. An overall warm tone. I think the blues back here in the sky just help to break that sense of warmness, and I think that adds a nice contrast. Not much that I think I would add here. I think probably I'm hesitant to try a crop here because we're so tight here, but I would like to see just a little bit simpler, maybe in the foreground, maybe something like that. Okay. Just to tighten this here, you don't need so much space. Why? Because your eye is not going to linger down here too long at all. You are going to connect, your eye is going to connect through this picture because the yellows form a connecting pattern, a connecting repetition. Okay, so I think making this a little tighter simplifies. And the other thing I would probably add is just a bit more dodging and burning to create more variation, more depth through the picture. So by that I mean, let's do a dodging or brightening. Okay, maybe just brighten some of these areas here in the foreground. Okay, creating a stronger, more variation. Maybe some of these oranges back here, give them, these yellows and oranges, give them a bit more attention. Okay, they're not, it's going to be very hard to make this stronger than the foreground, but this makes them a little, they relate more to the foreground without being lost. There's a beautiful connection between the colors here, and you don't want to lose that. That repetition is what helps everything work together. And I would probably also add a little bit of a brightening to this tree to give it a little bit more depth, to increase the natural light that already exists in the picture. That's different from fabricating light or adding a light that didn't exist to begin with. There's light there already. I'm just emphasizing it. This side of the tree is already dark. This is lighter. You can see how that's already there. I'm just emphasizing it. So again, that's the before and that's the after. I think that creates a nice, subtle, but important strength in terms of variation and moving the eye through the picture. If I were to continue this, I would add another brush to maybe darken a few spots. Maybe back here. Maybe I mentioned that the left side of this tree is the shadow side, so we can strengthen that a little bit. Okay. And maybe down here, darken these areas a bit. Okay, so again, before, which is flatter, and after, which allows the picture to have more of a feeling of how the light is undulating, or how the floor of the forest undulates from front to back, because the light creates that sense of changing of the changing undulation of the forest floor there. All right, so thank you, Stephan, for sending that. Next image, this is from Mark Shankman, Ice Cave. Very graphic, very beautiful. Love the colors, love the textures and the shapes, and I love the lines. There's a nice diagonal here that cuts across the image, and that gives a sense of depth and perspective because this is very close to us, to the viewer, and then that pushes us back down into the cave. Once again, as before, I think this is the core of the image, this change of perspective and depth, and I probably would want to strengthen that a little bit. So I'm just going to crop a little bit here, like that. And I just think that that pulls us into the picture a bit more. Maybe not so much, maybe something like that. And maybe over here, notice how we've got strong diagonals pulling us into the picture because of these dark shapes here. I probably do the same on this side, which is to say I would increase the dark shapes that are here already. So using the brush, some people are saying they're seeing 2 circles instead of 1. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening, but I'll look into that for the next one. Oops, sorry, that's lightening. Don't want to do that. We want to darken. So like that. Again, looking to create variation. All right, and that's basically it. Not much I need to add to this image. I think it's a very nice job. We just sort of tightened up the composition a little bit and added some of the darkening in the bottom right to make that right side also pull us into the picture, creating a lot of depth and creating that very graphic, abstract nature to the picture. All right, so there's the before and there's the after. All right, thanks, Mark, for sending that. Next picture is by Mikey Linder. Berlin Dome, I assume, is the subject matter here. And yeah, beautiful image. There's not much I can say to add to it. Obviously, very graphical in nature, beautiful tones, beautiful variation. A lot of the things that I've talked about before, we've got variation along the top here, leading us down, these repeating lines. I love the sense of movement. Plus, we got these people that are repeated throughout all these shapes. So that's really nice. I also like the way the image kind of just starts you right here along the bottom right and pulls you in and then continues. So yeah, not a whole lot I can say that I think needs improvement. Really nice job here. I love the just the mood of the picture is really interesting. The black and white adds a certain element of mystery and abstractness to it, which is what black and white is great for. So great job. Not much I can say aside from that. So thank you, Heike, for submitting. Next image is by, don't know the number. So if this is your image, well, hopefully you're watching. The mood obviously here is the most important thing. It's got a beautiful feel and mood to the picture. The ambiance, the fog, creating this ephemeral feel. Obviously, the tree here, for me, is probably the center of interest. We've got the bottom of a canoe, an overturned canoe there that adds an element there. I think, that's probably the biggest area of conflict for me, which is that we've got this beautiful tree that has repeating elements. It's repeated through the picture, but we've also got this canoe that's very bright. And I think that brightness, is a conflict. Like, what is the center of interest? What is the picture about? Is it about the canoe? Is it about the tree? Is it about a person coming to get the canoe to go into the water? But then the trees are so majestic and so mysterious. So I think that's a problem there. I think that's something that can be resolved. I like the leading line in on the bottom right here. And again, I like the depth that the image creates. I just think it has a sense of not quite sure what is most important in the picture. So first thing I would suggest is maybe I don't like these trees on the left. I think the way they jut into the picture that way creates a distraction. Your eye wants to kind of linger over here, and I think your eye should be staying in this area. So maybe we can pull that in a little bit like that. Okay, hopefully you can see that makes the image simpler and clearer, and we haven't lost the feel and the mood of the picture. And again, I mentioned about this canoe here. So I'm going to try an adjustment brush here, and we'll make this a darken, and we'll just see if by darkening it down, we can, there we go, make it feel more connected with the rest of the picture. That's what I mean by unity. Unity, I mean, and I can probably do a cleaner job. I was a little sloppy there with the adjustment. Let me see if I can just clean that up a little bit. There we go. So that's what I mean by unity, right? The tones of the canoe there, the brightness of the canoe is a little more in line with the rest of the picture. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't dominate the picture the way it was before. It's still there. It's still an element. It's still visible, but it doesn't take over the picture. It doesn't demand as much attention as before. And I think it allows the image to flow a little bit more. By flow, I mean the viewer's path to flow through the picture. We can adjust this to different amounts, something like that. But again, it's the idea that I'm trying to present here, not the specific technique of isolating that boat with an adjustment brush. It could easily be done, but I'm trying to show you the why I would want to do that. So here's the before, okay, where the boat just sort of dominates the picture. And here's the after, where it's a little more subdued. We know that there's a connection of the canoe to the water, but it allows us to wander and explore the picture a bit easier. It's a little more suggestive, as I said before, more suggestive than simply just saying, here's a boat, I want you to look at it. Okay. Other than that, I think that's about all that I would add. So thanks for the image. Okay, here's an image by Hello Brandeis, and here's another example, once again, of a picture that is beautiful in terms of what the core elements of the picture are. I love the light and the color of these foreground grasses. The trees back here have a beautiful, mysterious quality to them because they go into the darkness, so they really stand out. There's a nice backdrop, and I love this foreground, middle ground, background kind of layering of the image. I also like that there's a strong horizontal element here and a vertical element. So again, leading the viewer through the picture, we're leading them essentially from the foreground to the middle ground to the background. We're also leading them because we're showing them these trees here that are kind of highlighted, and that should be a hint to what I'm thinking because I keep talking about these trees here as being the highlights, which means that these trees here cannot be the highlights. They cannot be in the picture, because if they are in the picture, then these trees cannot speak on their own. They cannot be the focal point of the picture because there's another strong highlight on this side. So leading the viewer, center of interest, I think, is here. And the center of interest, I would say, is those beautiful trees with their stoic vertical nature. And then unity, does the image feel unified? And in that case, I would say it does not, because we've got a lot of things competing for the center of interest. I would be willing to bet that this was not on Hillel's mind when he made the picture, these elements down here. It was really this here, and this was included as perhaps a way of thinking that it would add to the composition. But essentially, our eyes and what we resonate with is pretty limited in the landscape, and we tend to add more because we have amazing wide-angle lenses, and sometimes they're great for that. Sometimes they work. Quite often, as we've seen in a lot of the pictures today, they're adding more than what we need. You guys are seeing and responding and resonating with what's beautiful in the landscape. We just need to make that clear to the viewer. That's a particular thing that is that's a skill that will serve you well, because clarity is really key to any art form. So let's try. I actually had looked at this picture beforehand. Let's try going into D. And so here are two crops that are possible. Here's one crop, which makes it a panorama. That's one way of getting rid of the distracting elements. I don't quite like this one that much because I feel that it's a little bit too tight here on the bottom. So here's another one. Okay. And this one cuts away a lot of the picture, but it also brings the core elements of the picture into the composition itself. Now, why I have gone so tight? Because if I back out over here, right, even if I back out here, I still have elements here that are interfering with the picture, in my opinion. I mean, even here, we might be able to get away with this. But again, I don't want to get away with things in a picture. I don't think you guys should be thinking about getting away with things. You want to make the composition as strong as you can possibly make it. And so I think in this case, making this even tighter is key. It brings this along a third. Maybe drop this down a little bit. It makes these trees much more interesting. It brings them to the fore, and we've got this backdrop. Now, how can we make this more interesting? Well, now we can add more depth. And so the simple way to do that would be to add some variation in the foreground to increase the sense of light. Okay, I'm highlighting where the light is already, striking the elements in the foreground. Okay, something like that. I'll drop this down a little bit in strength. There we go. Then I'll add another adjustment brush. We'll make this darken. And I'm just selecting the preset here just because it's a little bit faster, but I still have to apply it. We'll darken this shadow in here. Maybe darken this shadow in here, maybe in here. Okay. Look how much more interesting that foreground has become just using some basic dodging and burning. So there's the before, which is pretty flat, and there's the after. And we can do the same in the trees in the back. So again, I'm just going to emphasize what's already there. I'm going to darken some of these areas. to make those trees stand out a bit more. And I'll add another brush, and this will be lighten. Maybe bring out some of these here, like that. Okay, and I think now the image has a little bit more of a suggestive quality to it, right? It's a little bit more mysterious. We're not quite sure where we are. We're just sort of looking from this vantage point in the light into the darkness, as it were. And there's some light. You can see some light kissing some of these trees in the background. But now we're able to explore this part of the image much more intimately. It feels more of an intimate image. It has more of an intimate quality. And I think that's what makes it more interesting over the long term versus backing away. In the original picture, we had a very wide view where these trees are further away from us, and that doesn't quite allow us to investigate them as intimately as here. So again, this is just a suggestion. I think this makes the composition stronger. So thanks a lot for submitting. Beautiful. Move on to last one. Don't know who image this is. I'm not sure if that's Wallawas. I'm not sure if that's the name, but hopefully it is. If not, sorry. Another very nice composition, very nice leading line here. My eye flows from here up to these trees, back along this ridge back there, mountains and sky, okay? And again, anytime you create this sort of zigzagging shape through a picture in terms of the way the eye is led through the picture, that's going to create a stronger composition. Now, don't think that just because you've created a strong path for the viewer that the viewer cannot sort of roam on their own. I can go and explore in here, and I can see these trees over here, and I can go over here. So it's not about limiting the viewer's appreciation of the image. It's simply about making it clear to the viewer what the overall center of interest is and what the overall way to read the picture is. They can explore. That means a great piece of art allows you to explore, but yet it still remains simple and clear. So leading lines, path through the images is really strong. Center of interest, I would say, is the trees here. Probably there's a mountain in the back, but more than that, I would probably just say it's the drama of the picture. There's a beautiful, dramatic feel and mood to this picture. The fact that the trees are all similar, the light is similar, there's great unity. The one key problem that I have, or the thing that I think can be improved, is that I think the image is trying to say more than it needs to say. By that, I'm saying that we have strong, warm light in the foreground. Then we've got these strong vertical shapes catching some light. Then we jump to snow-capped mountains getting more light. Then we jump to dramatic clouds. And it's kind of like each one of these elements that I just mentioned does not want to become or does not want to be a supporting actor. They all want to be the lead actor. They all want to be the center of interest. The trees want to be the center of interest. The foreground wants to be the center of interest. The mountain wants to be the most important. And the clouds want to be most important. And that just creates an image where everything is competing. That's not what we want. What we want is to create something that dominates, and everything else needs to sort of let that be the thing that dominates. So I think one way of doing that would be two ways. One is I would probably crop a little bit in from the left-hand side just to, and actually, it's this tree here that I'm wondering about on the left-hand side. We could darken it perhaps, but I'm just going to just do the crop like this for now. Okay. And then the second thing I think we could do is I would drop a graduated filter from the top like so. And I would brighten the sky, or that is to say, I would take away the drama in the sky. I think it's too strong. And this image builds up like a crescendo, like sort of a climax, like an orchestra, right? It builds up from the bottom up to the top, and the top should allow the image to rise. And I think the way it was before, which was like this, it feels as though the clouds want to push you back down again. Yes, I can appreciate that you want the viewer to stop here, but then you've got a lot of clouds. If you want the viewer to stop here, then then you don't need all those clouds. If you want, I think, if you want the clouds to play a strong role, then they need to lighten up. Right now, we can go back to this adjustment and pull down on the highlights to lose some of the highlights up here, so they're not so bright. But I'm really trying to get rid of, or to improve, the balance of the tones in the picture, so that the tones in the background, those darks, don't compete with the tones down here, because these are the really strong tones. They create the kind of the foundation of the picture. I could probably also go in with an adjustment brush here and just take a little bit more out of that, like so. I don't think we've lost any of the drama of the clouds. In fact, I think they now complement the mountain more. And then we can go in here in the foreground, maybe open up some of these shadows here. And new brush, this is going to be a dodging brush, and I'm just going to brighten some of these trees a little bit more to increase or to emphasize that side light, that beautiful side light that's coming from the left-hand side. And again, that just has the effect of increasing or strengthening that pattern, that flow of the eye from the foreground to the background. And it also has the effect of creating more depth, more dimension, especially if you print this image, because that's when you really will notice that sense of depth. And maybe one more brush here, which is going to be a darkening brush. And I'm going to darken the opposite side of those trees. That creates that sense of depth. Yes, someone has suggested I take the tree out on the left entirely. I was tempted to do that. We could do something like that. I just feel like now we start to find other things that interfere with the left-hand side. So if we come in here, see, now we have a problem here where do we cut that tree which has light on it, or do we back up and then we include that branch, which is also a problem. So I saw that before, which is why I just decided to make a quick compromise here. Again, we can always go back, or whoever's picture this is can always decide what they want to do. I think that's right now something you can decide later. I think overall, though, the movement of the eye through the picture is what I'm thinking about. And maybe this is something I forgot before, but we can go in and I'll create a new brush here and just darken this side over here so that that is not so prominent. Something like that. The reason why this may not be a problem, I'd have to sit with it for a while longer, is because we've got a repetition of trees. And so our eye is not going to go out the picture here. It bounces back in because we've got other trees pulling you in. Whether that actually is true or not, I don't know. I need to spend some more time with the picture, maybe even make a print, hang it up on the wall, and then see whether that bothers me or not. But here's the before, where the image feels kind of dark and brooding. Here's it after. Here is where I think it opens. It's more open, more expansive, more inviting back into the scene. Okay, so I hope those ideas and those suggestions give you a better understanding of how I think you can improve this image, and also again of how we go about editing images using the compositional framework. I've got a few minutes here, so there's 4 more images that they're just quick edits that I wanted to show you. Quick edits meaning that they're just quick crops that improve the composition tremendously. Everything else I think is pretty good. So first image is this one here. Don't know who this is, but beautiful image, nice layering of elements from foreground to background, nice colors. But once again, the bottom part of the image, the bottom 50% of the image dominates and creates an imbalance. I don't think we need to have so much of that for it to work. So here's a quick crop. Yes, I know we're compromising the sky and the clouds and all that. Yes, I understand that. But we need to make a stronger composition. And I think this allows those footprints to still do the job of pulling you into the picture, of creating a leading line, but now the sense of balance between the foreground and the background is a lot better. We get to the sky, we get to the mountains easier and quicker and simpler than including all of these footprints and all this snow. Even something like that, maybe that's a better compromise. But that, I think, is much better and stronger than all this, where we just have more footprints. There's really nothing going on down here, and this dominates the picture too much. It doesn't allow me to move as easily and as freely up to the top of the picture. Not to mention this tree here, I don't think is really adding anything. So I love how the picture feels, and I like the mood of the picture. I just think that this is going to give you a stronger connection with the viewer. All right, and I think that makes a much more inviting and evocative picture. So thanks for submitting that. Here's another example. Beautiful lines and shapes here and kind of angles pulling you into the picture. Center of interest is this structure back here. Looks like some kind of a church or house, right? That's our center of interest. But look where it is. It's in the far right corner. We've got to struggle with all of this to get there. And so it kind of is confused. There's almost two pictures in one. By confused, I mean not that the photographer was confused, but that even though I'm sure that the photographer saw all these lines leading to that church, the camera doesn't quite capture it that way. It shows us everything with equal emphasis. And we look at the landscape and our brain interprets the landscape and automatically, subconsciously emphasizes and de-emphasizes things for us that a camera does not do. So I think that this would benefit from a pretty drastic crop, which would be not this way, because we still got the problem of dealing with all of this, but with something like this, where we break that symmetry a little bit. We keep those clouds, we keep the mountains, we have the reflection, but now we're going to this area here. Now, if the mountains on the left are more interesting to you and that's what you really like about the picture, then then this can't be in the picture, right? So we would do something like that, right? If that's the picture you want, if that's what's most interesting, then we could do something like that. But assuming that this is in the picture, assuming that that's what we want to maintain, then I think this is going to be your strongest composition, because it allows the eye to move in, leading the viewer up to the center of interest, and everything else complements that. And there's a much stronger sense of unity here and connection than in the uncropped version, where there is just more than I think we need to make a simple image. But thank you for submitting, though. Beautiful. Here's another example. Same thing. Beautiful mood and feel to this picture. Love the clouds, love the light, love the sense of drama with the fog in the foreground. But once again, I find myself drawn into the picture, right? I want to just kind of float over the scene and go into the clouds and go into that light emanating from the top of those mountains. And yet we've got all this foreground here. So I would definitely remove some of that. And the way I like to think about it is I'm not removing this. I'm strengthening this. I'm giving this more space, more breathing room. I'm giving it more clarity, okay? And I think that achieves that. You've got that little foreground there with a few trees. That establishes the picture. That's all you need. And now the eye and the viewer can flow into the picture. And these beautiful light rays here from the sky, again, a lot of variation, a lot of gradation. Those changes allow the viewer to move and create a strong center of interest and a strong sense of harmony, if you will. All right, so thank you. This is Steve Kozad. Thanks very much for submitting. Last one of the night. This is a similar situation. There is beautiful color here, nice subdued feel to the image, very serene, very calming. I love the light. I love the fact that the photographer allowed this to sort of blow out, right? You can see that this is blowing out, but that's okay. It just creates that aura that is beautiful. We don't have to maintain all highlights and all shadows, right? That's something that I think is a misconception. HDR is wonderful, but use it when you need it. And sometimes darks and things that blow out can create a sense of drama that you can't get if you maintain everything within the contrast range. The thing that I think is disruptive or is a problem is this log in the foreground. Why? Because it creates a stop. It's like I want to just flow into the picture, but this is like a hard stop. It's kind of like a barrier. So I would suggest to crop something like this. Okay, as one compromise, meaning that now we've got that tree in the foreground, but notice that we're not forced down into the picture, we're forced up because the tree goes from a darker area, a darker shade, to lighter shades in the water and then up to the sky. You can do it like this, or we can unlock the image so that we don't have to maintain the aspect ratio, and you can do something like this if you'd like. But I think that's a much stronger image. It gets us into the scene and doesn't have that, what I think is something in the bottom that isn't really necessary. This is the essence of the image. This is what is speaking in the image, what is giving the viewer a sense of what the image is about. This should just be adding context. And I think including all these shadows and shapes down here just add unnecessary words, if you will, right? Unnecessary words in a complicated sentence that we can just simplify. Just say what you mean. I understand the temptation to include lots of things like this. If one thing we've seen today, and thanks very much whoever submitted that picture, one thing we've seen today is that there have been a lot of images where I've just simply cropped and gotten rid of stuff. And I understand the temptation to do that. I understand why it happens because I've done it many, many, many times and I still do it. But you get better at it as you go along, as you start to A, have confidence in yourself, have confidence in what you're capturing, and B, have confidence that less is more. I know that's a cliche, but you don't need as much as you think you need to make a strong statement. A strong statement comes from clarity. Again, think about other art forms, think about music, think about writing. The clearer you are, the better you can be. And clarity doesn't necessarily mean that it's simplistic. You can be very deep and complex and have an image that has a lot of different angles or ways of looking at it and can still be simple. Okay? So I think that's about it for now. Thanks again, everyone, for attending tonight. I really appreciate it. I hope this was helpful. And I plan to do this again in 2 weeks. So stay tuned for another email letting you know of the date and time. I will probably try to do the next one at an earlier time because I got a lot of emails from folks over in Europe who didn't want to stay up to 1 a.m. I totally understand that. So maybe next time it'll be at noon, something like that, Eastern. But I'll let you know. All right. Thanks very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good night.